So in the first video, I had asked you guys to think about sort of three broad questions about how susceptible to change you are as a person, whether or not you have been defined by your experiences or you think your genes and biology have played a more significant role, and about how change has occurred as continuous, slow bit-by-bit change or in sort of large chunks. These three main questions represent the core sort of big ideas in developmental psychology. We refer to these as stability and change, nature and nurture, and continuity and discontinuity. Stability and change is the degree to which you are stable or susceptible to change over time. Nature and nurture is the role that both your genes and biology play in who you are as a person, as well as your experiences and environment. And lastly, continuity and discontinuity covers whether or not change tends to occur slowly or in substantial chunks or steps. So in this video, we are going to start by focusing in on nature and nurture. So nature and nurture is about the dichotomy between the role of our genes and our biology and our environment and our experiences as we grow up. Nature refers to the influence upon those traits that we inherit. The vast majority of traits that we inherit come from our genetics. They come from the DNA that is encoded in our cells that helps coordinate how our neurons connect to each other, the neurotransmitters that are produced, how much are produced. All right? And it is responsible for guiding and constructing our neuroanatomy, our neurons, our neurotransmitters, all those things that we have already talked about. How much of who we are as a person is defined by that construction. There are other types of sort of inheritance that we can get that are encoded in part in our genes and in part in other ways that more broadly represent our sort of historical movement through our development, right? These are things that reflect basically our evolution as a species that go back 500,000, a million years ago to sub-Saharan Africa and follow the transition of hominoid species as they have evolved and moved throughout the world. This is a reflection ultimately of adaptation, right? Those traits that help us survive and to reproduce. And this is a product of evolution. And we've already run into evolutionary psychology in the prior chapter. We talked about those things that make people attracted to other individuals, right? Evolutionary psychology is the study of how our minds are shaped by our evolutionary histories. And this is another form of sort of nature reflecting our traits, our characteristics, our drives, our desires. Nurture, on the other hand, refers to environmental influences. This is the experiences we had while growing up, our parents, our environment, access to different levels of resource, different identities, different cultures, different experiences in our education, different experiences in our family structure, different traumas or stressors that we affected. All of these things sort of inherently play a role in shaping who we are as a person. So that was the second question I had asked you to think about, is to what degree do nature or nurture reflect who we are? So hopefully you've thought about that and you have some thoughts on your own about it. But ultimately, as psychologists, we're all about trying to design experiments to test the role of nature or nurture. So how can we design experiments to test this? Well, if you remember, an experiment is about holding confounding variables constant and allowing only one thing to change. Most experiments that are designed to look at nature and nurture focus on twin studies. The idea is that identical twins share all of their DNA in common, while fraternal twins are no more genetically related than any other siblings. However, both identical and fraternal twins share a similar in utero environment and a similar environment growing up, so that the environment stays relatively constant, but it is the DNA that differs between identical and fraternal twins. Another way to think about this is if nurture is the thing that predominantly defines who we are as a person, there should be little difference between identical and fraternal twins. However, if nature is what predominantly defines us as a person, then identical twins should be more similar to each other than fraternal twins. There have been multiple twin studies. One of the biggest ever was the Minnesota Twin Study that looked at a large number of twins and analyzed them along a series of personality traits. These included things like absorption and imagination, which is your tendency to be lost in the clouds, to be absorbed in your own imagination. Neuroticism is emotional stability. Aggression is, aggression. Sense of alienation is how connected you feel to your culture and those around you. Traditionalism is how much you value tradition and culture. While the specific traditions may vary, the degree to which you value maintaining culture and tradition versus a more progressive mindset of change. Social potency is extroversion, how outgoing you are. Inhibition control is about your ability to control yourself and your behaviors. Sense of well-being is a sense of optimism. Low risk-taking is about modulating your risks, how risky you are as a person. Achievement orientation is your focus on achieving external goals, and social closeness is physical and emotional intimacy. Right? There's some people who really value that. They like to hug, they like to express verbally their emotions and their love for other people, where others are a little more removed. They're not as comfortable with the expression of intimacy in any form. So when we look at these different traits, what we find is that there's a ratio between identical and fraternal twins, and the higher the ratio, the more we can account for differences in these traits by genetics alone. Right? So the bigger the number here, on a scale of 0 to 1, the more we can explain these traits through genes. So if you take a look here, you'll see that all but social closeness reflect a substantial contribution of genes, with several being controlled almost 70-80% by genetics alone. This is a sign that nature perhaps plays a bigger role than we often think. We can look at a wide range of behaviors and personality traits. We find that, for example, with drinking and smoking, there's an inheritance ratio of about 0.56, 0.6. That tells you that they can account for drinking and smoking behavior in about 60% through genetics alone. Sexual orientation has been examined quite a bit, with studies ranging from 0.3 to 0.7 correlation. Even things like dog ownership show substantial correlations of about 0.5. There are several problems with the twin studies. One of them is that there's the assumption that fraternal and identical twins experience the same environment. But as many people have probably seen, there's a tendency to treat identical twins as more similar than fraternal twins. They may be dressed alike, they may be expected to behave and participate in the same activities, more so than fraternal twins. This might be a violation of that assumption. The other assumption is that identical twins are representative of the general population. There might be something about identical twins that make them more likely to be similar other than just their genetics, and therefore this data doesn't apply to everybody. To help sort of modulate this, another set of studies has looked at adoptions, with the basic idea being, are you more similar to your biological family or your adoptive family? If nurture is what plays the predominant role, then you should be more similar to your adopted family. If it's nature, your biological family. What is found is generally, like the Minnesota personality research that we looked at earlier, has found that many traits tend to be more similar to our biological relatives, but not all. Any traits that involve values tend to be more similar to adopted families. Religious beliefs, manners, political beliefs, things along those lines. Ultimately, though, the idea that nature and nurture are in some sort of opposition is fundamentally wrong. There's probably an interaction between these two things, such that nature helps kind of define the outside elements of who we are as a person, and nurture is what allows it to be expressed. At the end of the day, nature and nurture probably both contribute a substantial role to who we are as a person.